Sick. That's awesome, bro.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I found this video debunking every anti-communist argument ever, and this is from a guy named Spooky Scary Socialist. Now I only watched a few minutes into the video because I wanted to save the arguments for later. But I'm just gonna skip the introduction where he's basically doing this whole preamble about like what socialism and communism is and what people don't understand. But with that being said, let's get into the first argument he has.
All right. I'll
All right.
take notes.
And let me know if everything's good on your end, audio, visually, all that stuff.
Leo, yep, everything's good.
Admittedly, this first argument is more of a misconception than anything else, and surprisingly, it tends to come from people who are new to the left, and, well, sometimes people who are just misinformed.
So what socialism means is the government does some things and the private industry does some things, right? So private industry does Coca-Cola, Nike, makes your shoes. Government does other things like your police department, your fire department, your military. So you like the military? Oh, what a socialist you are.
No. Just no. Basically, the argument goes that socialism is whenever the government does anything, so everything related to the government is socialist. Following this logic, libraries, welfare, fire departments, garbage removal, streetlights, policemen, the military, the CIA, FBI, and prisons are all socialist. Hopefully everyone...
Yes.
But isn't it kind of, though?
Yes, I would say yes. The thing is, this argument only really works for like conservative people, right? Because they want all of these things at the same time as they want to, also at the same time criticizing the government. You know what I mean? So they'll be like, "Oh, I'm against welfare and I'm against this, and because that's theft, you're stealing from me." Oh, but whenever it comes to the things that he just mentioned, they'd be like, "Oh, well, we need those things. We need the government to do those things." So this argument absolutely goes against a lot of conservatives. But for a libertarian or an ANCAP, it doesn't work for us because we look at all those things as socialism. And in fact, what Cenk Uygur said a second ago is, I think, the perfect, a pretty good definition of socialism. And what Hoppe said, which is he looks at it as being a institutionalized violation of property rights, which is, he kind of looks at it as being on a spectrum. So you can either be more socialist or less socialist, more government control over the economy, less government control over the economy. And some countries, they have more socialism, and there are some countries that have less socialism in some areas, in some places. So in the United States, we have a pretty free market. In some places, they don't have a free market. They're more socialist, whereas America, we're a little bit more capitalist. But we're not full capitalist and we're not full socialist. It's like somewhere in between, So us libertarians, we look at that stuff as being socialism, and we want to be full capitalists. We want to get rid of all the socialism. So, this argument would go against a conservative person, but it doesn't really work against libertarian ANCAPs like us.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty well said. I'm curious if he's going to actually respond to this, because the way I see socialism and communism is I don't really see the distinction. I think at the fundamental root of it, it really is just like collectivism. Like, that's just what Marxism and socialism is. The value is of society. Society is more valuable than the individual. And because of this, they tax and then they redistribute the wealth. And any form of this is a form of collectivism. And collectivism is manifested physically through socialism and communism. That's how I see it. But I don't know if he's going to go any deeper than that. Well,
if I could add something, I'm sorry, but I could add something. You're absolutely right. But how I would distinguish it is like socialism is like a mixed market where you have some socialism and some capitalism, and communism is full government control of the market. That's where I would differentiate it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there's anarcho-communism, which is a paradox and it doesn't work.
It doesn't make sense. All right,
Libraries are good, but grouping these things with the military, police, and prisons is ridiculous. The police is the same institution that shoots unarmed black men, incarcerates a massive amount of the population, and gets away with murder. This type of talk comes from people who want to normalize socialism to normies by showing them that, technically, the United States already has socialism. And while I agree that normalizing socialism is good, at the same time, it's not good to basically deprive it of all meaning. So, what is socialism? Well, it's common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. Related to that is communism, which is a stateless, classless, and moneyless society with common ownership of the means of production.
Okay, but if we look at the definition of socialism here, the common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange, like, what are they saying? That's the entire market? Like, are you saying it's not
Yeah.
socialism until the entire market is democratized? Because
Well,
that's ridiculous.
what they're trying to say is that the means of production would be things that create other things that people work with. So that would be like working in a factory, the machinery, and the people who own that, they look at that as being exploitation because they're profiting off of the work that other people are doing in order to create the products that means of production is creating. So they believe that thing that creates other things, the distribution and means of production, should be owned by the workers, the people who work within that company. It should be like voted on and this and this and that. But of course, the question that always arises is, well, how do you do that? Do you use the state to come in and force companies to commonly distribute the shares in each company to force them to do that? Like, or are the companies just going to willingly do that? Like, how are you going to convince them to do that? It doesn't seem to me like there is any way to do it without some level of force, So that's why us libertarians, we'd be like, oh, what's common ownership? Well, actually, what you mean is state ownership of the means of production. Because how are you going to take over the means of production if you don't use the state? Are you just going to, as a group of people, go up to the company and force them to have like a revolution? Well, then you've basically become a state. You've become a criminal organization because you ruffled something away from somebody without their consent. So in the end of the day, it always comes down to an institutionalized violation of property rights. What you're doing is you're recognizing a system in which you approve of violations of property rights, like socialism. So the proletariat has the right to take from the bourgeoisie. You're authorizing that in the law, essentially.
All right, very, very well said.
Yeah.
But wait, wasn't the Soviet Union and all those other places communist? How could they be when there was still a state? Well, they were run by communist parties, so they are in the sense that they were trying to achieve it, but strictly speaking, they hadn't achieved a communist society. That's enough definition, Squabble.
And
for
to
the sake of
address the
streamlining
communism, to address the communism thing, is you can't really have communism without a state as well, because it's like kind of a weird, like, how do you, like I said earlier, like, how do you enforce it? Like I would like for him in this video to explain how he could possibly enforce communism without a state. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't think any communist ever has been able to give an answer to that question.
Every single time that communism has been tried or socialism has been tried, the means in which they use to enact their will has always been the state. So I don't see how he's going to explain that away.
Yeah.
I'll just call any country that advertises itself as communist or socialist as a communist or socialist country, even if it's a bit of an oxymoron considering the definition. So please don't flame in the comments. It's supposed to be an introductory video, and that you'll type in. The image that comes to most people's mind when the communists or socialists talk about wanting more equality is that of a bland, boring dystopia where everyone is forced to be equal. Communism would essentially force everyone to become part of a hive mind, or at least that's how the general idea goes. However, the idea that more equality means suppressing the talented elite to the common level of the masses is just wrong. When communists say we want more equality, they mean freeing the masses so they can unleash their suppressed talents. After the October Revolution, there was a flourishing of art, culture, and creativity. The Futurist movement, legalization of divorce for women, and the growth of cinema were exciting developments compared to the Tsar's regime over the masses of people. It turns out liberating millions of people from the clutches of capital creates an exciting artistic society, not one where everyone is forced to be a hive mind and conform to some incorrect abstract idea of equality. Meanwhile, in capitalism, schools...
Was Russia... Is he talking about Russia?
I think he is.
Was Russia capitalist before they became communist? I'm pretty sure they were a different system, weren't they?
I doubt it was capitalist.
I'm pretty sure it was a whole different. Didn't they have like I don't know what it was, but I don't think it was capitalist. If he's talking about Russia, I mean, I may be wrong. I highly doubt it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Prepare students for a lifetime of work, while workers have to become mindless drones in jobs that a majority of them hate. Any sort of excitement or interest is usually reserved for the rich and powerful, while the rest of us go on with their boring lives. People worse off have to deal with the growing ecological disasters that are literally killing them and destroying their homes, while the rich profit off ignoring any sort of sustainable solution. Maybe all this talk about a communist dystopia is really just an example of capitalism projecting itself?
Yeah, so if I could address what he just said real quick, I want to address what he just said, which is that I think the one thing about communists is they look at they're blaming the wrong 1%. You know what I mean? They're looking at all of the bad things that are caused by the state or crony capitalism, right? That we can all agree are bad. And then they attribute it to capitalism because the states or the countries that we live in claim to be capitalist nations. You know what I mean? But even though they're not really capitalist nations, they're crony capitalists or any other word you would like to put it. They're certainly not capitalist. So because of that, they say this that means that capitalism is the reason why all of these bad things are happening. But again, all of these a rich person isn't going into your pocket and stealing money from you. A rich person can only become rich, right, if they offer you something in exchange for the money that you have in your pocket. A company isn't going to force you to go into work and work for them if you don't want to work for them. Whereas the state, they are quite literally forcing you to pay their taxes. They're going into your house. If you don't pay your taxes, they will come to your house with men with guns and they will arrest you. And if you resist, they will quite literally kill you. So I think it's a little bit weird that a lot of communists, they get angry at business owners and they'd be like, oh, these business owners are evil because they have a lot of money and they are trading something in exchange for that. They want something in exchange for the money that they have or the goods and services that they provide, right? Whereas the people who are quite literally stealing from you and forcing you to pay into the system, they look at those people and they'd be like, that's perfectly fine. And if you don't like it, just leave. You know what
Yeah,
I'm
just
saying?
leave.
Just leave. But
Just
if you're
leave.
working for a company, that you voluntarily worked for and you can choose to leave if you don't like it, that's coercion because if you don't like it, if you don't work for that company, they won't give you things that'll keep you alive. You know what I'm saying? So you should be allowed to force that person to give you stuff, you know? I think it's just like a weird backwards logic. It's like what Vosh was doing the last time, where he was giving the state the special status, where the state is completely okay in stealing from people and forcing people against their will to do things. But if a private company, if it's implied that a private company, even though it's not actually happening, if it's implied that a private company might be coercing people, oh my God, this has to be stopped. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at the wrong 1%. The 1% that we should be looking at is the people in government. Those are the people who are really stealing from us, robbing us, taking our money, doing things that are destroying us and the
Yeah.
environment.
I would say even that in a corporatist society, there is no like 1%. There's like the 1% of the 1%, which is that in a corporatist society, you're actually tightening and monopolizing the power of the most powerful industries because they have control over the law and they have control over the politicians who they pay and who they bolster with their advertising and their ownership over all the marketing and all the money that they have. So you're in fact bolstering the most powerful privatized people in the society because now they have control over the game that is politics.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's a little. That's a really good point because it's just like I think it's a little odd because how do you think these billionaires became billionaires? They became billionaires because they got special tax exemptions and things like that from the government. They got handouts from the government. How do you think Elon Musk got a lot of the loans to build his companies, as well as Bill Gates? A lot of name any billionaire, a lot of those guys got loans, tax breaks, this and this and that. They lobbied the government in order to give them an easier time. So, yeah, they're bad for doing that. And I'm sure we can all agree with that. But it's the state that is giving these companies disadvantage. If there was no state, they wouldn't have this advantage. They would have no choice but to compete in the open market, in the free market. But they don't, because they have a state that can levy things in their favor.
Yeah, every time I've argued with like a person who's like almost socialist leaning, I've always brought up this point that like how can you believe in this society of like a socialist or communist society when we already have evidence showing us that, and they even agree this themselves. They agree on this point that the people who control politics are the people who are the most corrupt and the richest people, and
Yeah.
they can control the entire game because they have enough money to buy both sides. And it's like if you look at these big companies, like I think who's the owner of Meta? Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
And Mark Zuckerberg and all these other billionaires, I believe lots of them like donate to both campaigns, both Republican and Democratic campaigns, so that when they eventually get in, another crypto dude did this too, where they donate to all the campaigns so that they have influence in both parties. Whichever
Yep.
party that gets in, they have influence in that party. And it's like, how can you be okay with the system where now it's worse for the people, because it's not just like an equal playing field anymore where your money has meaning, where you vote
Yeah.
with your wallet and
Yeah.
your feet, I guess. But now they control the monopolized power. The elites control the monopolized power, not the victimized majority. The elites control the monopolized power, and I don't understand how any statist can grapple with that fact. It's just mind-boggling to me.
And one last small thing, and you're right, 100% correct. One last thing is, if you think that the guy who's at the fourth top billionaire, what's his name, Bill Gates, is the richest man in the world, you're just dead
Elon
wrong.
Musk?
Or Elon Musk, whoever it is at the top right now, whoever they say is at the top is the biggest wealth owner in the world, is just dead wrong. It's the people who run these large authoritarian governments like Putin, Kim Jong-un, the person who runs China. Those people are the richest people in the world. Those people are the people who have the most wealth. And there are people who run the state.
All right.
I've already dealt with the topic of death counts, specifically concerning Stalin, in a previous video. Needless to say, when scholars looked at actual archival evidence released from the Soviet Union, they found that death counts were actually much lower than what was previously estimated. The paper, Victims of the Soviet Penal System in the Pre-War Years, found that many of the previous estimates of historians were based on guesses, rumors, or extrapolations from isolated local observations. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I covered in the full video, but the point is, the death count of communism, which includes Stalin, tend to be overblown and exaggerated to gain more attention. A lot of the 100 million stuff comes from the Big Black Book of Communism, which was deliberately bloated to come to a nice round number. Methodology for these things is also highly suspect, as sometimes they can go as far as counting someone who stubbed their toe in a communist country another victim.
Well,
What the?
all I can say, I don't really know the history and all that, so.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't personally care about if communism killed 100 million people or 10 million people, because it's like it's bad either way, and it's like it just doesn't work theoretically. So
yeah. So the thing about us is that we're not attacking communism because it's killed millions of people. Although I do believe that it has killed a lot of people, but that's not the argument that we're attacking. We're attacking the logic behind it and how it's flawed. The idea behind it and how the idea itself is flawed. And the reason why there's so many deaths because of communism is because the idea is flawed. And I think a point a lot of people make when they point out a lot of people who died of starvation in communist countries is because in a free market, when two people exchange goods and services with each other and a person dies of starvation because they didn't have enough money to pay for their goods, no one's responsible for that, right? You're like, I'm not responsible for some starving child in Africa dying somewhere because I have more wealth than them, right? Whereas under communism, it isn't really the same thing. We don't have equal what do they call it? free exchange of goods and services between individuals. You have a government basically coming in, forcing people to do what they say, hoarding all the resources, and then distributing it in the way that they want to. And because of that, people starve to death because they don't distribute it to in an efficient enough way to feed enough people, because they're getting rid of prices and all of this stupid things that communism does. So that's the reason why a lot of people dies, is because the idea itself is a bad idea. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We don't even have to take this on the historical level. We can just take this on the what is it? The written down, practical, theoretical planning level. Like, it just doesn't work in planning or preparation, let alone in reality. Okay.
Animal Farm.
Let's see.
You know, he really is playing that music.
What the hell?
Excuse me, sir, but I read this one fictional book about a farm and anthropomorphic furries, and it shows that revolution will always fail. George Orwell's Animal Farm has probably done more to poison the discourse on communism than any other book. Yes, even you. The most obvious reason is that it's usually taught in schools, with students being forced to swallow everything with an uncritical mind. For those of you not in the loop, Animal Farm is basically a short book with direct comparisons to the Soviet Union using farm animals, eventually showing a devolution to a brutal dictatorship of the pigs, which is totally what Marx was advocating. It's annoying to talk about any sort of leftist policy and just get Animal Farm yelled at you, like suddenly these people become experts on socialism in the Soviet Union after reading it. I feel like it's getting to the point that people forget Animal Farm is fiction. It's not a real thing. It completely ignores the material reality that the Soviet Union had to face, namely the invasion of 14 capitalist nations that defined its policy going forward. It also has sweeping reductions of history, combining Marx and Lenin.
I don't really think we have to respond to this because it's kind of a nothing burger.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a book. I mean, people can, like, it's a fictional book. Like, he's not wrong about that. So
this doesn't seem like a legitimate argument against communism. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, I wouldn't, like, me personally, like, if I'm gonna argue against communism, I wouldn't be like, hey, read the book Animal Farm. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's an interesting book, from what I hear, and they say it mimics what happened in Russia and all that stuff like that. But it's not like real life. Like, I'm not gonna point to it and be like, hey guys, you want to know what's bad about communism? Read Animal Farm. It seems like he's addressing arguments that people don't like. I've never heard anyone say like, "Oh, read Animal Farm. That's why communism is bad." Like, I've never heard anyone say that. I hope he addresses like arguments that we're making.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
actually, we agree with you, Spooky Scary Socialist. We agree with you on this argument. You are correct.
Yeah,
this is a
it's
bad argument.
Yeah, pointing to a book is not enough to be like, okay, you know, you're
Therefore,
wrong
we
because
can't
of
do
this
this.
book. Yeah, like, that's like saying like, oh, democracy's bad. Just watch Star Wars Episode 3.
Which is a great movie, by the way.
Yes.
Great movie.
Yes. Very cool. No food, LOL.
The fact that communist countries had famines is mocked again and again, but it ignores the fact that after these famines, countries like the Soviet Union and China accomplished food security for the rest of their existence. A study called Economic Development, Political Economic System and Physical Quality of Life compares socialist and capitalist countries based on different levels of development, looking at the physical quality of life of both. Data for the study was taken from the World Development Report of the World Bank. Shockingly, it found the daily per capita calorie supply was actually higher in socialist countries than those of capitalist ones. Contrary to the much proclaimed no food, the average socialist citizen was receiving more food than their capitalist counterparts. By the way, the same publication also shows that not only did socialist countries have a higher calorie supply, they also had lower child death rates, higher life expectancy, population per physician, population per nursing person, adult literacy, and secondary education. In fact, the Physical Quality of Life Index, which is a composite and derived measure, shows just how superior socialist countries are to capitalist countries in terms of quality of life. The discussion section of the study goes on to say, historically there is some evidence that the discrepancies between capitalist and socialist nations have reflected varying social policies. All the socialist countries have initiated major public health efforts. These initiatives have aimed toward improved sanitation, immunization, maternal and child care, nutrition, and housing. In every case.
Okay, so I guess what he's trying to make is like the argument that here's this study that shows that people are better off under socialism, than under this capitalist country. So therefore, socialism is better than capitalism. Now, I'm not really sure how true his statistics are.
Yeah.
So, I'm not going to dive deep into that because I don't really go deep into empiricism that much. Somebody else can go into those numbers and maybe debunk him on that. But I'm going to attack his like utilitarian argument, basically, which is that, this socialist country that called themselves country socialist had better off people, and by this metric, this arbitrary metric that I have, that I like, by this standard that I really, really like. So therefore, we should do this system as opposed to that other system. All right. But my issue with that, of course, is that simply because, there may be more utility in choosing one decision over another, that does not make it the right decision or the okay decision, right? Socialism entails the violation of property rights. So therefore, how are you going to get the goods and services in order to distribute it amongst all the individuals whom you're distributing it to, right? They have to steal it from other people. They have to force people to work. They have to take it from other people unconsensually. And let's say, you're in a amazing, beautiful utopia, right? And like I always use this example, which is like, let's say you're in a beautiful utopia, but the only way to uphold this beautiful utopia with no scarcity, no wars, and no problems, is to perpetually torture a child in a basement. Would that then make it okay? And the argument is, of course, well, no, we shouldn't torture children, unless, of course, he's going to go on the hard utilitarian ideology, which he would say, yes, it is okay to torture children if it makes people better off, which would be pretty fucked up. But
Yeah.
but simply because you have more utility, right, in making one decision over another, or you think that, stealing from other people in this country is okay because there's more utility, that doesn't make it okay. Stealing from people in order to make some other people's lives better does not make it okay. Stealing from a rich person and giving it to a poor person, yeah, it may increase the utility for the poor person more than it does harm the rich person. But it's not okay to steal from people. It's immoral, because then you run into the situation where you again have to justify pretty much some pretty fucked up things if you take your ideology to its logical conclusion. Because if you really believe that utility is what ought to determine the outcomes, well then, yeah, you would have no choice but to say, yeah, somebody must torture that child.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yep. That's good. I mean, my argument for this is that, I mean, I don't know what statistics he's looking at, and I haven't read them, but I mean, I guess I could believe that if he's talking about like overall production, I don't believe that even for a moment, that the idea that they had more food production in a communist or socialist system, because like I would need to see the math work. This is like when you're in a math class and the teacher's like, oh, you can't just have the answer, like you have to show your work. This is one of those things, and this is one of the reasons I hate empirical evidence in general. I don't hate all empirical evidence, but I hate empirical evidence on the macro scale. And it's the same thing. This is my problem with Keynesian economics, is they sometimes will do these mathematical models, which are so macro, large scale, that they can't possibly capture all the variables. So when they do things like this, like child death rate and low income and population per nursing per person, like how do we know for certain that they are considering all the factors into these studies? How do we know that it's working out? And some people argue that there was large famines in Soviet Russia, and that's why there were so many millions of deaths. But again, I don't think that this is sufficient evidence to prove that communism works, because I would want to see all the variables being captured. And that's why I hate macroeconomic studies. So that's what I think about that.
But even but where I attack it is just like, even if what his statistics are saying is true, that still doesn't give you the right to violate property rights. Even if you're communist, even if stealing from other people did bring more utility to some other people in that Russian time at that moment, that doesn't make it okay, you know?
Yeah. Well, it definitely wouldn't work in law. That's for sure.
No, absolutely. That's contradictory. You're violating rights in order to make some people's lives better.
Mm-hmm.
In the Communist
Oh, there we go.
Manifesto, Karl Marx
Yep,
states,
this is
the
your
theory
kind
of
of
the
argument.
communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. Many people have taken this to mean that communists don't want anyone to own anything, even to the point of sharing our toothbrushes communally. Hey, it's my turn. Oh, okay, here you go. Open wide. Or. But anyway,
What
if you
the
actually read the
hell?
manifesto, literally 1 second earlier from that quote, Marx says himself, the distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. How communists use private property in this context is different from the common definition. Communists don't want to take away your toothbrush
Personal
or things that
versus
you
private.
possess. Those are personal property. Private property are things used to make more money and give power to those that own them, like a factory, banks, offices,
For the record, I don't see a distinction.
Nah, he doesn't. There is no distinction, and I'll explain when he's done. Go ahead.
and infrastructure. The abolition of private property means taking those things from private hands and putting them into the hands of the community. To sum it up, communists don't want to take away your personal property, just the private property of the ruling class.
All right. So the problem with this argument is what you're doing is you're making an arbitrary distinction between goods and service, scarce resources, that when taken to its logical conclusion, it puts you into dicey situations that I don't even think this guy would even believe in. For instance, when he says that personal property, that means like a let's say like a lighter or like a cigarette or something like that, something that doesn't produce other things that are in need by other people, right? But there are tons of things that would be considered to be your personal property. Well, they would consider to be personal property that does produce things that other people need in order to live. For instance, your blood. Other people need your blood in order to live. So your body can produce blood the same way for another person, the same way that a capitalist owner owns a machine and that produces essential goods and services for other people that they need. What gives you the right to exclude another person from that scarce resource that is your blood if there is a better use for it that the community sees to it for another person? So let's say the community came together and they're like, hey, we believe that your blood is better used for these 10 people who are going to die of this disease if they don't get your blood. Do they then have the right to take your blood because that's a factor, that's something that you produce that is needed for other people in order to live? Well, I would argue that he would probably say no. He would probably say, oh no, you can't force somebody to give up their blood. Another example is like, let's say you're on an island and you decide to create a stick, right? And that is for hunting, right? That's an essential item that you need in order to live. And there's only one spear like your own that is being used, and you don't want to give it up to another person on that island, and they need it in order to survive. Would that then give them the right to take that thing from you? If you say yes, my next question would be, why? The communist answer would, of course, be, well, that person is going to die. And if you don't give them that thing, or, like the coconut example as well, you could replace the spear with the coconut, right? As well. Oh, if you don't give them that thing, they're going to die. So by you withholding that scarce resource from that person, you're coercing that person. So, okay, well, your body is a scarce resource. That coconut is a scarce resource. That spear is a scarce resource. All of these things can produce other things that are essential to other people, right? So it seems that your distinction is basically not based on whether it produces necessary goods or services for other people or is a factor of production, but it's based on your own arbitrary whims. It's based on you being like, oh, well, this factory, I arbitrarily think that this doesn't actually belong to the owner. Whereas this other thing that produces things that other people need, such as your body or a stick or a coconut, that thing is personal property because I say so, because I think so. And then, of course, what ends up happening is communists, they never come to a solid agreement as to what should be considered to be public property or private property, right? And then that's when they debate with each other and they get into infighting, and it always ends up crashing down. Some communists, they go as far as to say only business should be turned into co-ops and that's it. And then there are other communists or socialists that say we should all communally own homes together, and children should be raised communally together, and everything should be done communally. So it isn't always like not every communist is going. It's completely arbitrary based on that individual communist ideology. Like, am I right?
Yeah, you are right. To build to build on that, because you're correct about the arbitrariness. So spooky scary socialist is basically saying that we're not gonna take your personal stuff, the poor people. We're gonna take the elite stuff. And I think the first and most important problem with that is how do you distinguish the rich from the poor? How do you distinguish the elite from the non-elite? There's no line that you can actually draw that won't be arbitrary. If it's purely wealth, or if it's based on private property, so it is basically on wealth and ownership of assets. You have to create a distinct line that is not arbitrary. It has to be grounded in something, and they have nothing to ground it in. They just say we're going to take the rich people's stuff. Well, what does it mean to be rich compared to be poor? What is the cutoff line? Is it after $80,000 a year? Is it $81,000 a year? Is it $100,000 a year? There's just no line. There's no line that's not arbitrary, and that alone means that you can't distinguish between the elite or the rich and the poor, because there is no objective line to put there. So with that said, how do you know what to take from who? You don't, because it's all arbitrary. It's all, I feel like he has way too much money, right? It really just comes down to your feelings.
Yeah. I heard Vosh debating somebody one time, and he was like, hey, if you own a business of like 3 or 4 people, or this arbitrary amount of number of people, well, then you have to turn that thing into a co-op. You know what I mean? Like, there is never a solid, like, okay, when you hit this line, when you do this thing, when you become this, that's when you become a bourgeoisie. That's when you become a proletariat. This is when you're a proletariat. This is when you're a bourgeoisie. Every single communist has a different definition. Whereas us anarcho-capitalists, we'd be like, okay, listen, everything that is scarce is going to be considered to be private property, because every scarce resource can have conflicts over. So because of that, when there is a conflict over a scarce resource in which there can be exclusionary uses for, or a dispute over, then we have to assign who has the right to use that thing in that exclusionary way. And that's where private property rights come in. And every single system assigns private property. Even socialist systems that do that, even anarcho-communist systems. The only thing about anarcho-capitalist systems is we're honest about it. We look at the way that it is. We don't put an arbitrary line on, oh, well, you can own this and you can't own this. You can own this and this, but you can't own this and this. We don't have an arbitrary line. We say is, if it's a scarce resource, that it can be private property. And if it's not, well, then there could be no disputes over it. Like an idea, for instance, there could be no dispute over an idea or an MP3 file that could be copied infinitely. So therefore, it can't be property. You can't claim it as your own. You can't stop other people from using it. You know, it's based on scarcity. Scarcity is the reason why we have property in the first place. We don't put arbitrary lines on what you can own. It's based on whether it's scarce or not.
Yeah, the ANCAPs are the only ones who are consistent with their economic model, because they believe in private property all the way through to the end. If you are a true communist or true statist, you would have to believe that everyone owns everything all the time, including people who lived and who have yet to live. All of those people own everything at the same time. Like that would have to be that is the only thing that would make your economic model consistent.